Parak Vav, the sixth chapter of the book of Yechezkel. Yechezkel still being told prophecy is related to Yerushalayim, which has not yet been fully taken by the Bavel, by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar, by Hidvar Elai Lemor. And God came to me, Ben Adam, man, mortal, human being, son of man, Simpanacha el Hare Yisrael, Vihinave Alehem. Turn your face towards the mountains of Israel and give prophecy to them. Strange thing he's being told to go to the mountains. Why the mountains? Well, perhaps, many times we're told about how the idolatries were on top of the mountains. That's where they would go up and set up their idols on the highest places and points. So maybe that's why. V'amarta Hare Yisrael Shemu Dvar Adonai Elohim. Ko Amar Adonai Elohim leharim v'ligvaot la'afikim v'lagei ayot. Hineni ani mevi alechem cherev v'ibadati bamotechem. And I say to the mountain, hear the word of God. This is what God says to the mountains and the hills and the streams and the valley. I will bring sword against you and destroy your shrines, your bamot. Your bamot literally is like a high place, but all of your different idolatrous places that here, and very often in the ancient period, maybe so today, I don't know, were marked by natural places in nature, a river, a hill, a valley, that those were the places where more worshiping, idolatrous worshiping was being done. And so God says, I'm going to destroy them. Continuing verse 4, Pasuk Dal, V'nashamu mizbechotechem, v'nishberu chamanechem, v'hipalti chalalechem lifnei gilulechem. Your altars will be wrecked and your incense stands smashed, and I will hurl down your slain in front of your fetishes. V'natati et pigrei b'nei Yisrael lifnei gilulechem. And I will throw the corpses. I will place the corpses of Israel in front of their different translation here in the JPS is fetishes, in front of their different idols, idolatrous places. V'zeiriti et atzmotechem svivivot mizbechotechem. And I will scatter your bones around your altars. Well, at least one thing that this takes me back to, all the way back in the book of, early on in the book of Melachim, when a man of God, an unnamed man of God, is sent to the temple of Yeravam ben Nevat and says to him, in where you have set up this idolatrous shrine in hundreds of years, the bones of the priests that are sitting here are going to be burned. And that comes true in the days of the great king Yoshiyahu. And so when I see, it reminds me of this story reminds me of that, where around the idolatrous shrines, that's where your bones will be scattered. That's where the destruction will be and take place, obviously showing that the center point, the reason for the destruction, is related mostly to the idolatry, which is adultery, which is right, going against your bond and your relationship with God. Continuing verse 6, Pasuk Vav, B'chol moshvotechem ha'arim techeravna v'habamot tishamna leman yechervu v'ye'eshmu mizbechotechem v'nishberu v'nishbetu glulechem v'nigdeu chamanechem v'nimchu ma'asechem. So in all of your settlements, the towns will be laid waste, and the shrines will be destroyed, and your altars will be empty, and they will bear your punishment. They're going to be smashed, annihilated, destroyed, all of these different aspects. And again, here, much like we talked about yesterday, that the main word in the chapter yesterday was cherev, the idea of the sword, which related back to the curses that would come to Bnei Yisrael back from the book of Vayikra and Parshat Bechukotai. Bnei Yisrael don't listen to God's commands, and so we have the word cherev used oftentimes here. It's not surprising, cherev, or bond, destruction. So it's not surprising it's here, but it still brings us back to those aspects. Continuing verse 7, Pasuk Zayin, V'nafal chalal b'tochechem v'datem ki ani Adonai. So what does God say here? What is Yechezkel commenting to them? Then when you fall with the destruction, then you will know that I am God. Which is interesting. This is a phrase that's used all over the Tanakh, going back all the way to Shemot, to the Exodus story, where God says over and over again, both to the Jews and to the Egyptians, that these plagues, that the splitting of the Red Sea, V'datem ki ani Adonai, that as a result of those things, you will know that I am God. It's interesting. Sometimes it's because of God's miracles and wondrous things that he does that people know that God is in control of the world, and other times it's sadly it's because of destruction and because of harm that people know that there is God. You could say it's almost related to many Jews. There are Jews who are inspired today by wondrous acts by their fellow Jew, who are inspired by our religious texts, by our communities, and that's what helps them identify as Jews. And sadly, there are Jews who come out of the woodworks, as we've seen over the last month, sadly, based upon threats and enemies and destruction and pogroms and massacres, who this is what sort of inspires them or challenges them or charges them to really stand up for themselves and for the Jewish community. So it's not surprising that we have different people using different motivations, but this phrase is a phrase that's used in all sorts of different places. Continuing verse chet, we'll see the phrase comes again later. Verse 8, "V'hotarti biot lachem plitei chereb bagoyim," but I will leave a remnant. Some of you will escape the sword amongst the nation. Behizo rotechem ba'aratzo, when you are scattered among their lands. V'zachru pleitechem oti bagoyim asher nishbu sham asher nishbarti et libam hazoneh asher sar me'alai v'et einehem hazonot acharei guluhem. And some of you who will, right, the pleita, the small numbers of you who Sherita Pleta, who've been left scattered in Bavel, by the Euphrates, by the Tigris River, by wherever it might be, you will remember me. A few of you will remember me, and you will turn back to God, and right, you will be embarrassed, and you will be upset and angry for all of the abominations, for all the worshiping of other gods. V'yadu, Pasuk Yud, verse 10, Ki ani Adonai. And you will realize that I had a reason. I didn't destroy Jerusalem. I didn't scatter you amongst the nations for no reason. There was a reason for it. You'll understand the reason. You will understand why the destruction needed to happen. I took you out of Egypt in order for you to create a just society. We talked about that with, right, the idea, I think it was it from the Abarbanel, back when 390 days for the kingdom of Israel, 40 days for the kingdom of Yehuda, Yechezkel, way past Yechezkel was told to lie on his side. And is that for the 430 years that the Jews were enslaved or were in Egypt, not just enslaved. In the beginning, certainly wasn't enslaved. And right, so I took you out of your 430 years of Egypt in order for you to build this just society. But what have you done in this society? You've rebelled against me. You committed adultery with idols. Your society is one that takes advantage of the weak. It is a society much like Egypt, not like Egypt. And so you'll understand that we need to start again. If you're going to build the society which is based upon tzedakah, mishpat, on righteousness, on justice, which is first told to Avram and later told to David HaMelech, that's the type of society that God wants. And so that's why we needed to scatter you. We needed to destroy that so that hopefully when we start again, we can build a better society. Continuing verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Ko amar Adonai Elohim, Hakeh v'chapcha ureka beraglecha, ve'emar ach el kol to'avot ra'ot beit Yisrael asher b'cherev barav u'badever yiplu. So God said, strike your hands together, seemingly clap and stamp your feet and cry out, ah. Not clear exactly what this word means. It's used by Yeshaya in the chapter where he talks. It's used back in the book of Shmuel. It's not exactly clear what, if it's a proclamation that's of anger, of joy, and so, but cry out, aha, over all the vile abominations of the house of Israel, and those who will die by the sword, and those who will die by the famine, and those who will die through the plague. Harachok badever yamut, v'hakaro b'cherev yipol, v'hanishar v'natzur barav yamut, v'chiliti chamati bam. Right, those who are far away will die through the plague, through pestilence. Those who are close will fall by the sword, and anyone who survives will die by the famine. And this way, God says, finally, my anger, my rage, my wrath will conclude. And then vidatem ki anu Adonai biyot chalehem betoch ulehem svivot mizbechotem el kol givar ramah b'chol roshei ha'arim v'tachat kol eitz ra'anan v'tachat kol eila avuta mekom asher natnu sham reach nichoach l'chol gululehem. And you will know that I'm God. when all of these people have been killed and their bones lie next to their destroyed altars on the mountaintops, under the trees, under the oak, right, wherever they presented their reach nichoach, their pleasant odors, their sacrifices, their incense to all of their different idols. And when I see this, and this is a phrase that's used, tachat kol eitz ra'anan, and it's sort of like there's this comparison. When we think about the Messianic times of Jewish life, it's not exactly clear, but the Tanakh version of the Messianic times is not this wondrous, miraculous. It's a person's going to be sitting tachat gafno, v'tachat te'eno. They're going to be relaxed. They're going to be sitting there, calm, without worries, under their grapevines, under their fig trees, without worrying that the enemy is going to come in. And so we sort of have this contrast from this chapter. In other places, you're under your trees to worship idols, or you're sitting under your tree peacefully with a sense of a joy, and you're content, and know that no harm is going to come. And so that, to me, when I read this chapter, read this verse, it really contrasts with that expression of what is the Messianic period, the way it's described in the Tanakh. We've seen that before, and of course we've spoken about in the letters from Washington, where he talks about that. George Washington talking about how Jews should be free in this country. This should be a country where people can sit under their fig tree, under their vine, and etc., etc. Verse 14, the last pasuk in this chapter: "V'natiti et yadi alehem, v'natati et haaretz shmama, u'mishama mimidbar divlata b'chol moshvotehem v'yadu ki ani Adonai." I will stretch out my hand against them. Talked about that as contrast to the second half of the book of Yeshaya. God stretching out is a description of, I created the world, you should know that I'm here. Now the stretching out of the hand is, the punishment that's being done here. The land is waste. Everything is desolate, from the wilderness all the way to Divla. Divla could also be Rivla. Sometimes it's called Divla. Sometimes it's Rivla. The Dalet and the Resh, of course, two letters that look similar. Rivla is where Nebuchadnezzar had his capital when Tzidkiyahu, the last king of Israel, tried to escape, as was described in the last chapter of the book of Melachim, and again the last chapter of the book of Yirmiyahu, and he's captured by the Babylonians. They take him to Rivla. They take him to the place where Nebuchadnezzar is, and that's where his sons are killed and his eyes are cut out. So saying this is right, it's all the way from here, all the way to Bavel, everything is a disaster. Everything is laid waste. And when this happens, when you will see, then v'yadu ki ani Adonai, then sadly it is because of the destruction and the horrors that you will know that I am God. And it's a difficult chapter. It's difficult to understand all these chapters. I mean, it's not difficult to understand, but it's difficult, at least for me, to relate to this idea that destruction is what's going to bring you closer to God, that is necessary. But we see it's a theme that sadly happens many times in the Tanakh, many times with going back to Pharaoh, and in other places where it's only through God showing this might, which sometimes that might is a destructive might, that people will recognize and realize what God is, and perhaps mend their ways and create a society which is worth living for and worth being part of.